All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the last event of our Waste-Free Future Summit. We're so glad that you're here. We want to remind you that the other events that we had this week, which were all fantastic, really good attendance, really great participation, and fantastic presenters. We are going to send some really great recordings out to you. We'll do some follow-up emails, and we'll make sure we do a survey so you can tell us how we can make this even better next year. This event is also going to be recorded, just so you know. And before I hand it over to Kevin, I want to remind everybody who Just Zero is. Just Zero is a nonprofit organization, which means we are funded by donations. We work for the greater good. We are registered as a 501c3. So we do this work to try and make the world a better place with our fantastic team, and we'll get to more about that later on. We really, really believe in empowering communities, and as we will discuss, that is even more important now than it ever has been before. We believe in making sure that the world is a just place and that we have just solid waste systems. We work on waste from soup to nuts. I know a lot of the kids don't know that term, but a lot of you folks probably heard it before. And what that means is we work on composting, we work on bottle bills, we work on reducing packaging, we work on textiles, we work on all the different sludge and other waste products that we see in the world that are too toxic and that we're producing too much of. And we are working to change those systems. And again, we know that can be done through empowering communities, which we'll talk about our toolkits and other ways that we're trying to do that. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Kirstie. And before we get going here, I just want to make one more housekeeping note for everyone to let you all know that unlike some of our previous sessions in this summit, we're not going to be doing kind of an audience Q&A at the end of this. This is just going to be more of a discussion between Kirstie and I. But the chat is open during this event. So if anyone has any thoughts, reflections, ideas, anything that they want to share with us or the group as we're going along, please feel free to put that in the chat. We'll kind of do our best to pay attention to what's happening in the chat as we go along during this session today. So speaking of, let's get going here because it really has been a privilege over the past few days to join with so many of you from across the country as a part of our Waste-Free Future here summit here, and to reach and engage with so many people who are doing this type of work around the country or who are interested in perhaps doing this work around the country. And we've heard during this, as Kirstie mentioned, from a wide array of folks, some really, really great presenters throughout. You all who have been at other sessions have heard from Just Zero staff about some of the cool work we're doing, about some of the cool work many others are doing all across the country. Folks who, like us, are working to empower communities and pursue real zero waste solutions to kind of move us forward and get us out of the current waste and plastic pollution crises that we're in. So here today, Kirstie and I are going to kind of talk back and forth and share some thoughts on what's happened over the past few days, where we think zero waste as a movement, where we think some of these policy solutions are going forward. And so I'd love to jump right in by revisiting the session that started off our Waste-Free Future Summit, which was just a fantastic and inspirational keynote address from Diane Wilson, who has fought for years and years against a highly polluting Formosa Plastics plant in the San Antonio Bay on the Gulf Coast of Texas in her community that has impacted the health and well-being and environment of so many, many people. And a few themes really, really stood out to me from what Diane had to say. Themes that I think have resonated across the summit, resonate with our work at Just Zero, and resonate with what a lot of you all are doing and working towards in your community your communities as you fight for zero waste. You know, and the first one of those themes is that the waste crisis and the plastic pollution crisis, they're so much broader and so much more encompassing than many of the polluting companies and corporations and many of our politicians want us to think. I think that Diane's presentation really drove home that waste and plastics are not just a waste crisis, are not just a waste problem as we think of them. They're an extraction problem. They're a production problem. All of this stuff in our lives, especially the plastics that inevitably end up in our waste, are leaving a polluting legacy far before they ever enter our lives and are impacting our communities in a wide variety of ways. And community is really another big theme that stood out to me from what Diane had to say, because she talked about, just amazing, diverse set of stakeholders and participants who she's worked alongside for so many years to affect real change.
36 years, 36 years, she said.
Years. Yeah. And community is so deeply embedded in what all of us do, right? It's who we're trying to protect. It's who we're working with. It's like the bedrock of all of our policy work of this entire movement. And it's so big.
Yeah, it is so big. And I think there were a few themes, first of all, I'm a total Diane fangirl. So like, I have to call that out. I've been a fan of hers for a long time. So I was so glad she was willing to do this with us. But first of all, she's tough. She's so tough. I mean, I guess being a fisherwoman in Texas, you have to be tough, but she definitely has brought that to the environmental movement. And I see that with all of the community leaders who are trying to pass bills, who are trying to pass ordinances, who are trying to stop polluting facilities that I've worked with across the country. So that's not surprising. They are usually women too, which is interesting. And we could do a whole session just on that, why that happens. But her toughness, and then at the same time, her kindness and her openness, right? Because of a lot of the folks who brought her some of the best evidence were Formosa employees. So they called out the pellets and powder that were coming out of that plant to their bosses, and their bosses fired them. And so they started gathering up this evidence. And basically, it sounds like they basically had to dump it on the court. And that's how they won in 2019, right? Unfortunately, these regs and all these pieces should be regulated, and we should be protected without having to do a citizen suit over a period of 36 years. You really should be able to be safe without that. And I think that those big systems you're talking about, Kev, like that's exactly right. We see huge monopolies and these huge corporations. The problem in this country is the corporations. Don't kid yourself. It's not the rank and file folks, it's the corporations. And we see these huge monopolies in our beverage industry. We see them in our plastic industry, which is tied in, all the petrochemical industry and the chemical industry. We see that these big monopolies in the waste industry. We had something like 9,500 landfills across the country, and now we have about 2,500. And that's because we're now building mega landfills, mega incinerators, mega chemical recycling facilities, and they don't work. And they're not safe, and they're not clean, and we're not protecting our communities. So the question that looking at this and seeing these huge monopolies, the question to us is how can we help communities across the country, because it is about community, work to pass new laws and policy that put people first? How can we do that, Kev?
Well, and a lot of what you just said is so resonant, Kirstie, when you talk about the power that many of these monopolies and these corporations have, and the profit that they reap, frankly, off the backs of people that are forced to live near these facilities, and off the backs of the folks that want, frankly, like all of us, want to go to the grocery store and buy their groceries without coming out of the store with an armful of plastics, right? And those companies just are not going to change unless they're forced to change. We know that they're not going to take it up on their own because they've been given the unfettered ability to do what they want for decades. And this is the reality that they've created for us. And you mentioned kind of communities across the country working to pass new laws and policies. That's what it's all about. This all starts, the real change starts at the community level. Communities who know what they want to see change, communities who know what zero waste means to them, know what their priorities are. You know, we heard a lot about this during last evening's event that featured Yvette, Jennifer, and Seema talking about zero waste campaigns in action. And again, quick reminder for everyone that's attending right now, all of these are being recorded. And so in the future, you will have access to that conversation that our policy and advocacy director, Peter, had with Yvette, Jennifer, and Seema last night. But they talked a lot about how each of their communities has faced different types of challenges, have approached those challenges differently, have their own separate goals. And that's so key to this work, right? Like, we can't paint with such a broad brush that the solutions that frankly need to be community-based are going to be the same everywhere. And you know, we've seen that play out in these discussions that we've had during the summit. We see it play out in all of our work every single day, every single week, that everyone is approaching this in a slightly different way, but we're all together kind of in the movement working to fight against, frankly, what you said, Kirstie, this big corporate control that has set up this system that fails. Doesn't fail for the companies because they make billions of dollars off of it, but it fails for us. For all of us whose bodies have been so heavily polluted with plastics and PFAS, because frankly, it is all of us. There are microplastics in every single one of our bodies.
And one thing about that, Kevin, one thing about that, when we're talking about, you know, having watched Peter and all three of those incredible women last night, all of whom I've been following their work. I'm on coalitions calls with them and see them and have seen them speak in person. You know, Yvette, for instance, speak in person, and she literally makes me cry every time I hear her. One of the things I think is really important to remember that they said each of them said in different ways, is that we can't give up, even though that's true, because it matters if there is more plastic or less plastic, or more PFAS or less PFAS in the environment and in our bodies. It really does. That, you know, it's not, you don't give up just because it's there. You also don't give up just because climate change is already happening. It matters if we are a degree hotter or less hot, right? This year is going to be the hottest year we've ever had, and it's, you know, terrifying, but it matters how bad it gets. So we all have to keep fighting for that reason.
100%. I mean, it seems when we hear about some of the things that we constantly talk about, it seems so. Sometimes we talk about plastic doom. It's kind of like climate doom. Yeah. Like, what's the point? Since our lives have been so thoroughly contaminated, but it doesn't have to be this way. We can create a better future for ourselves and for our children and for everyone in our communities. And I think that to kind of harken back to the conversation that Peter and I had on Wednesday night about zero waste legislation and some of the tools that Just Zero has created, the solutions to this problem are tangible. They're at our fingertips. The types of things like bottle bills and plastic bans that communities have been working on for decades, they're right here. And if we roll up our sleeves and do the hard work the same way that so many of these communities and folks like Yvette and Seema and Jennifer, the hard work they've been doing to implement these policies, this can be the reality in places across the country. The more we do to push this work forward, get resources and a helping hand to those folks who are doing the hard work of pushing for what they believe they need in their communities.
Right, that's exactly correct. So given that, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the orange elephant in the room, if you will. We're facing a hostile administration. That's the reality. Give me what do you think, Kevin, about that? What is when you know, given what you just said about empowering communities, what does this mean to Just Zero and the environmental movement going forward?
Well, you know, one of the sad realities here is that we're in a place that we've been before. And there's no sugarcoating the fact that, like, many of us believe that it's going to be worse this time around in light of the most recent federal election. But so many of the things that communities have done over the last decade to kind of build a zero waste future for ourselves have been despite hostile federal administrations. Frankly, both Republican and Democrat. Not to both sides this horrible situation,
Yeah.
but the reality is that we have not seen much, if any, of this change happen at the federal level, no matter the administration. But there are still real concerns, and something that Jennifer mentioned during last night's panel about barriers to the legislative process. That's one of the things that I worry a lot about over the next few years. How many more barriers will the state government or will the federal government and some state governments erect to keep people from making the change that they need in their communities? But at the same time, folks have been working to overcome those types of barriers by building community and spreading accurate information. And I think that it's important for us to have some level of hope that we can continue to do that over the next 4 years, over the next 10 years, so on and so forth.
Well, again, we know that this incoming administration, you're absolutely right, is going to be worse than the one that we've been working with over the last 4 years. We do, on these issues. However, it's never been great, as you said. Like, there's a real, the reality is that the petrochemical industry, the waste industry, the beverage industry, they've all pretty much done what they've wanted in this country, so that we're not up against a new problem. It just might be a more entrenched problem. And I think that the answer, as far as the campaigns and action that we do, the local policies and the state policies, we have to be more aggressive about them, no question. I think we have to hold our local leaders, whoever they are, Dem or Republican, accountable. But also, I think we have to be realistic that we will build our environmental power as we build power that will also support fair elections in the future, right? Which the elections have never been fair. The electoral college system, whatever, again, that's another, we could spend hours on that too. But building that local power and doing this work also bolsters the way that our democracy operates and how effectively and efficiently our democracy operates. So grassroots power is more important than it ever has been, I would say.
Yep, especially when it comes to, similar to what you were saying, push for government transparency, for accessibility. And I'll add on top of all of that, one of the key features that we see in so much of this grassroots environmental work, kindness. Doing this work with kindness for ourselves, kindness for our neighbors and our communities, we can build the safe spaces that so many others in this country are frankly intent on breaking down. We can build those spaces within our own movement, those accepting spaces that work for real progress in the right ways. And on that note, again, something that Yvette mentioned last night that really resonated with me, she said, don't discount anybody in your process when you're building this movement, right? Regardless of political stripes, political affiliation, regardless of other beliefs, we can treat each other with fundamental respect, because when it comes down to it, so much of what we are trying to work toward in the zero waste movement are common goals that everyone has.
Right.
Cheaper solutions, better solutions, safe environments for our kids. Everybody wants that. Like, let's work on it together with kindness.
And I think that we need to treat ourselves and those around us with kindness. We have to leave the door open so anyone can come join us in the tent to work on this. I think we also, though, do have to call out the bullshit, right? We have to make sure that we say, no, this is not true. And that was really interesting hearing Joseph and Brett and Megan talk with Olivia about that, because chemical recycling, for instance, is just bullshit. It's not going to work. And the way that we've handled our toxics in this country, letting them be used, with no oversight practically, until somebody gets sick, is a real problem. So we have to make sure that we call that out and that we communicate efficiently about it, like get right to the point and say things like, yes, there are plastics found in your brain, in the placenta, in testicles, and it means this. It means you're going to be sicker. and make it, Olivia brought it up a couple different ways, a couple different times. We need to make sure that it's real for individuals, that it's felt personally and real for individuals. And as you said, it doesn't matter if you have an R or D next to your name. When you really understand that, if you have your own urine or blood tested, for instance, and find these chemicals, yeah, you're going to take it seriously. So I think we need to really fight back against the nonsense while still, I always say, hate the sin, not the sinner. The corporations are the problem. The rank and file people who are, caught up in this mess are usually just trying to make a living and be a nice person themselves too. Like, let's remember that. And I think that also we saw that in how the Formosa campaign went over those 36 years. Remember this, you're in for the long haul. So,
And
yeah,
and especially as you mentioned Formosa, of course, the result of that Formosa campaign led by Diane was was the largest citizen suit settlement at that point in time in history, which is a big deal. And I think shows us that, again, something you and I talked about before, despite how scary so much of this is and the narrative and the need to push back against all of these false solutions, there is hope.
yeah,
And we see that especially at the local and state level. And I think that that's important to remember. And it's something that we've talked about and will continue to talk about in this conversation, that every day we see progress. We may not see a new law pass every day, but every day we see progress at the state and local level, moving toward real, tangible, effective zero waste policies that can make a difference.
right.
State, counties, and towns around the country are pursuing those real solutions. And on that note, and what some of those solutions look like, I just want to shout out to everyone that we're about to post a poll that asks you all what topics, what zero waste topics you're interested in learning more about as we talk about many of these solutions in the future of zero waste. So please take a quick second and answer that poll, because we'll be returning to those results in a moment. But, as we talk about these zero waste solutions, I think many of us, certainly Kirstie and I included, but probably a lot of you attending now or watching in the future, expect to see over the next few years many of the similar efforts that we've seen over the past few years. Communities addressing single-use plastics through bans on things like single-use plastic bags and polystyrene foam food containers and other forms of pernicious single-use plastics. We expect to see folks continuing to push forward with extended producer responsibility for packaging laws, which we like to call at Just Zero, when they're constructed in the best possible way, packaging reduction and recycling laws. These can be an effective method to reduce plastic production by forcing companies to use less plastic packaging and less single-use packaging in the first place. We also expect to see continued renewed interest in things like bottle bills. A number of states have attempted over the last few years to pass bottle bill systems or deposit return systems for the first time ever. States like Rhode Island, Illinois, Maryland. We expect to see more and more of that, and hopefully some states breaking through as that kind of grassroots, community-built, kind, supportive network continues to push their governments across the country for real changes that can make a tangible difference day to day on this type of stuff.
That's right. And again, I think that we have to remember, we also have to empower our local agencies, whether it's county, city, or state agencies. The DEC, the Environmental Agency in New York, just denied a permit for a pyrolysis facility, a high heat facility, basically a sludge incinerator. And it would have been burning sewage sludge and trying to sell it as fertilizer. And what they found was that, this technology is not going to destroy all the PFAS. So we have to remember that we've got local tools that cities and towns and counties, the District of Columbia, states, like Hawaii's refill program. That's something that I think if we get that really right in Hawaii over the next 4 years, then maybe when a lot of this other dysfunction passes, maybe other states will say, wow, Hawaii did it because they're an island, but we're kind of all an island, right? Like, we really need to understand that we shouldn't be making single-use products and throwing them away. So we really hope that, those local programs, and whether it's pilots or ordinances or plans or permit denials all really reverberate and can be replicated throughout the country.
And one of the things that can absolutely be replicated on in terms of the examples that you just mentioned is that those agencies, those governments, they heard from the people about what they wanted and
right.
they didn't want. And in the best examples, their government, as they should, responded to the needs and the demands of your community. That's a trend that I hope we will continue to see play out, despite, again, some of the political currents that many of us are worried about these days. That's something that we should demand of our government, that they continue to empower their residents and their citizens and continue to listen to their voices.
And I think we have to remember too, Kev, before you get, I know you wanted to talk about the poll, we are able to do things online like this presentation, right? We're an hour away from each other. This is so much more efficient, and that people are watching this across the country. That's amazing. We can email folks, we can gather those signatures, we can help the folks in New York in a permit push like they did for this pyrolysis sludge facility. We can help even though we're not in their same town. So we need to really appreciate the technology that allows us to do this. Even 10 years ago, we couldn't have done a webinar like this, right? So we have to be really thankful for that and really lean into it and be more and more aggressive about using all these technical tools.
Yeah, and I totally agree, Kirstie. And I think these tools are also super useful when it comes to hearing from folks across the country about what they're working on, because we expect to see that as we see some emerging trends play out over the next few years. Parts of what's in our waste stream, like textile waste and building materials, carpets and home goods, the sewage sludge issue that you were talking about. Folks across the country are pushing forward on new solutions on these types of things. And the more we're all connected, the more that we hear from people and folks hear from not just us at Just Zero, but everyone working on this type of advocacy across the country, the stronger all of this work becomes.
Yeah, and we also, we do have so many resources that we never had. I sent an email to the menswear guy yesterday about textiles because I was like, you know what, he understands how textiles come in and out of this country. I'm gonna reach out to him. That's something that, we didn't have that ability 10, 20 years ago to reach out to folks and know who was out there working on things. Do you don't watch the menswear guy, do you, Kev? You don't know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, sorry, because I'm
I'm gonna have to send you his stuff anyway. But point being, what do we get for poll results?
Yeah.
All right. So do you want to go through, or do you want me to? Everyone can see it, right?
Hopefully everyone can see it. Just from first glance, one of the things that I'm not surprised about at all is that there's a spread here. Certainly some of these got more votes than others, but it's not like folks are just interested in one particular thing. It's not that, those of us who are working on this are like, I just want to focus on food waste, like let's worry about all the rest later. And that's kind of one of the reasons that we do the work that we do at Just Zero. And I know personally that Kirstie and I are both involved in this work because we like working on the full spectrum of our waste crisis. I'm not going to say soup to nuts like Kirstie did because nobody knows what that means. I'm going to explain to everyone that when Kirstie says soup to nuts, it means the full spectrum of our waste crisis.
Like a dinner party. You start with the soup, you end with nuts at the end. Nuts and a mint, maybe. Yeah.
I've never once been to a dinner party that finished on nuts, and I would be highly disappointed if I was served nuts as dessert.
It's a 1950s dinner party. Be nice,
But I think it does stand out to me that that all of the folks here today that are tuned into this, see different parts of this as issues. It's not just one thing. There's a broad spectrum of concern, just like there are a broad spectrum of problems when it comes to our waste. It's not just about plastic. It's not just about food waste. It's not just about sewage sludge. It's all of these things, and we can do work on individual pieces. And the important thing is that as we break off each one of those individual pieces, it helps build momentum build community as we work towards some of the broader scale solutions.
That's right. I do see my friend Jackie said you had nuts after dessert. See, I told you, Jack. Told you, Kevin. Jackie told Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. I love Jackie. Anyway, absolutely, Kevin. And I think that you've also hit on one of the secret sauces at Just Zero, and that is we don't work in silos. Now, there are some fantastic folks who focus on one thing. Our friends at Beyond Plastics focus on plastic. That's fantastic. We want folks to do that and do those deep dives. But because these problems are all connected, as you just said, we have to connect how the solutions work too. Because you don't want to solve climate and not solve toxicity, or just solve toxicity and not solve climate. You don't want there to be no farmland left. We're not going to get anywhere there. So that tells you, again, we do this work, and I'm not surprised that everybody's interested in a lot of it, a lot of different pieces of it, because again, we work on a lot of different pieces of it. We do it that way intentionally, and we have structured our toolkits and our approach in a non-siloed approach. Our team at Just Zero is not the food team and the plastics team and the sludge team. Our team works together. And maybe someone takes the lead on one thing or another, but we all work on everything at least a little bit, so that we have depth on the bench in each area. So if you could explain, Kev, the toolkits and how that fits in with that larger vision of not being siloed and trying to chip away at the whole problem in a meaningful, systemic way.
Yeah, I would be happy to, Kirst. And you mentioned kind of the interconnectedness between the different solutions and how we don't silo ourselves into these separate issue areas. I think one of the ways in which our toolkits represent a different type of interconnectedness is that they're a way for us to connect some of the policy-based solutions and some of the best practices that folks have used across the country with the people on the ground in towns and cities, counties, and states all across the country who are working on these solutions. So Peter Blair, our Policy and Advocacy Director, and I on Wednesday night did a quick little overview of our model legislative toolkits. Again, for those who missed that, the recording will be available. But one of our key objectives in designing our model legislation in a toolkit format was to empower the folks, again, who are doing this work in their communities, or maybe who are interested in doing this work in their communities, to kind of build their own policy proposals from the ground up. As we said several times here today, folks in their communities know best what zero waste looks like to them. And they know what they can get past in their community, given the political realities they're facing. And they know what their strongest coalition and community of organizers and other folks will look like. So let them start with their objectives, empower them to choose the issue that they want to address, and build the best possible policy proposal around it using examples from around the country. That's what we're trying to do with the toolkits. And it's one of the key ways in which we envision our work aligning with our mission, which Kirstie mentioned our mission at the beginning of this webinar. But our mission is to work alongside communities and lawmakers, educators, organizers, scientists, and others all across the country. These types of toolkits, we think, are one of the most effective ways to do that, to put the policy building tools directly in the hands of the folks who are the ones who should be building the policies, the folks who are impacted, the folks who have their own goals, not necessarily a removed lawmaker who's not touching one of the issues, certainly not a corporate lobbyist who's peddling some false solution into a state legislator's ear. Let them hear from the people in the communities who have built these proposals from the ground up.
And I think that's really important, that, people think toolkit and they think there's a model bill and some 2-pagers to go with it. This is not that. This is, here's an outline, you fill in each section which works for your community. Because as you said, Kevin, and this has also been a theme throughout this whole week, people are the experts in their communities and what their communities need and how to best protect their environment and public health. Yvette mentioned that, Seema mentioned that, Jennifer mentioned that, Diane mentioned that. You're going to walk into this work and think, oh, that's an expert. I'm not an expert. No, you are a fucking expert. And you have to remember that you're an expert in your home, in your town, in your needs. And you're also probably an expert in how to organize those folks because you know what's going to fly in your county that may not fly in another county. So that expertise is really, really important, and you need to lean into that and own that, and use our toolkits. But again, when we look the way we look at it is we say, okay, we're going to create the policies and we do reports, we do issue briefs. We really try and make sure that we take those issues and understand best policies writ large. And then we hand the toolkit to the community so the community can then figure out which pieces of it are going to work for them.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of the best ways the toolkits work with these legislative toolkits work with some of our other resources, the reports and issue briefs that we prepare, our state and local waste planning toolkit that we also have up on our website. It's about empowering folks, and again, also sharing with them lessons that have been learned from across the country, from some of the devious corporate campaigns being pushed by some of the bad actors. Let's connect folks with the best possible information. Let's connect them with the best possible resources by putting them and while at the same time, putting them in the driver's seat when it comes to designing the solutions that work for them.
Right. And it starts with planning, and our planning toolkit, which I believe was just put in the chat, again, is where you start on this. And sometimes that seems small, but if you can get a handle on the data and get a handle on what's going on in the waste system around you, that's important. And then also if you can get local leaders to make promises that they're going to change things, get those on the books. That's what those plans do and are really, really important. And then we will support you, as you're figuring out those plans, we'll support you. We'll also support you as you as you build your community organizations, and state-based environmental groups. We're happy to help with again, just the stories you just talked about, Kevin, where people, what we know have happened in other communities in other states, usually in this country, but sometimes there's even information from around the world that we've been told, things that really don't work, or that create incentives that are not good for getting a good program going. And we spent a lot of time on that. Again, it goes from our reports and issue briefs to these toolkits, and then helping the communities actually make change happen, which is really, really important. We're here to be a resource.
Yeah, and to return to something you said earlier, Kirstie, about how technology today allows us to be more connected with folks around the country. I think exactly that. We love hearing from you all. Is there something that we can do to help you out on this journey? Is there a particular resource that we don't have that you'd like to see from us? Do you have a suggestion or a recommendation, or has your community done something that others haven't seen and may be worth highlighting and exploring further? Like, that is all the type of stuff that we want to hear about from folks. And again, regardless of what your zero waste priority is, I hope folks see us as a resource and a group of people who are ready to pitch in, again, grounded in the kind of kindness and looking for community building and support in all of the right ways at all the right times.
Yeah. And as we wrap this up, I do want to remind people to value themselves, because even our journalists said, Waste Dive, Grist, and also, of course, Brett from Break Free all said they want to hear from grassroots groups. They want to hear from people who are right in the middle of this. Value yourselves, because we all value you, and we cannot do this without these folks. So now let's turn to wrapping this up and reminding folks that this is not free. This work, we keep our costs very, very low at Just Zero. We're basically just paying for salaries. We don't have a brick and mortar store, but we need your donations. We don't take money from the waste industry or bad actors. There are some nonprofits that are taking money from, to be perfectly honest, the industries that are making the problem. We don't do that. Okay, Just Zero does not do that. When you give, you're not just making a donation, you're becoming part of the movement. And that's a fantastic way for you to be part of this. Sometimes you're not going to be able to work locally. Sometimes you're not going to be able to be politically active. That's all cool. But if it works, write a check. We appreciate that, right, Kevin? We gotta make sure we're all in shoe leather, right?
Write a check, use the QR code that's up on your screen right now, use any of the donation links that we've dropped in the chat previously and that I see we've just dropped in the chat now. We very deeply appreciate all of the support that folks that are tuned into our work give us. And to be honest, it's about the monetary support, but also the community support, right? Like by signing up for our email list, by tuning into our work, you are helping us build this groundswell of what we're doing at Just Zero, and you enable us to offer the input and the services that we offer to community members and grassroots coalition without charging for those services. Because I think that's something that's important to mention. As Kirstie said, this work is not free. It costs us at Just Zero money to do this work, but we don't charge folks for the work that we're doing because we see it as our mission to support communities in their journey, regardless of whether or not they're the type of community that could cut a check for a consulting company to do a zero waste analysis for them. We're here to do the work with the people who are doing the work and who may need a little help, need a little boost, need a bit of a resource. Maybe they just want to chat with someone at Just Zero from time to time, but we rely on donations, on recurring donations. Folks sign up to give once a month, or folks who give what they can at any given time. This works because we're a member-supported organization.
Yeah, and I say with absolute seriousness, you saw Kevin and Peter and Olivia and myself this week. We're not the whole team at Just Zero. In fact, we're the mean ones. You know, the rest of the team are even better and even smarter and harder working that you don't see. We've got Heather and Vanessa and Sakina and Lauren and Laura in the background on this work. They're fantastic. Please, please, please support us so that we can continue to build this wonderful team of people, because that's one thing I think that is really important to know about this work. You get to work with the kindest, nicest people in the world if you do this work, which is another reason to make it worth doing, honestly.
And to broaden it a little bit further, the team is even bigger than Just Zero, right? We had folks from community organizations join us during this event. I would urge folks to support those organizations, follow the work that Seema, that Jennifer, that Yvette are all doing, that Brett is doing at Break Free from Plastic. When it comes to this support for Just Zero, we hope that you extend that support to any of the organizations, both local and national, that are helping this movement writ large. It is more than about just us at Just Zero. It's about all of us and building this community, especially over the next 4 years through ongoing support, is going to be such a big part of the work that all of us do. So whether you're supporting Just Zero or supporting your local zero waste group or supporting another group that's doing climate advocacy or environmental advocacy, thank you for your dedication, for your support. It's such a big deal as we continue to build momentum and build this community.
That's right. And I just want to close, with a couple of thoughts. We're all frightened about the future, and honestly, that's very rational. That's not an irrational response. But I think it's really important to remember that one of the reasons that we're in this moment is because we've made progress in the past, right? When I was born, I'm 53. When I was born, if you wanted to become an attorney as a woman, you would be looked at, they'd look at you and think you were crazy, or are you taking a spot from a guy? I've heard from older attorneys. Now my daughter's in law school. My niece hopefully is going to be going to law school next year. That's not considered a crazy thing anymore. We know that there are kids. When I was growing up, if you were part of the LGBTQ community, you didn't say so. Nobody was out. Nobody was out. Now at the same high school, my daughter has tons of friends who are able to say who they are. And so we have to remember that they're trying to shove us back into the kitchen and back into the closet because we came out, right? Because we escaped. And so we have to keep making sure that we support each other, support the people of color, the impoverished people, our LGBTQA friends. We need to make sure that we're supportive of and kind to everybody and include everybody in this movement and be as big a tent as possible, because that is the only way that we're going to protect our environment and our public health, is that everybody's at the table and we respect and are kind to everybody that we're working with. So we do that at Just Zero. As I said, the nicest group of people I've ever worked with. Kevin, thank you so much for all your hard work. You were fantastic today, as always. Peter, Olivia did a great job this week, and all the rest of the Just Zero team, thank you. And I can't thank Diane, Yvette, Jennifer, Seema, Brett, Megan, and Joseph enough. I think I got everybody who participated. They were all brilliant and wonderful. Follow their work, follow them on whatever social media platform you use. Please support Just Zero so we can keep doing this. And thank you, thank you, thank you, everybody, for making the Waste-Free Summit, Waste-Free Future Summit, a resounding success. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.